Imagine waking up in a world where your voice doesn't matter, your rights don't exist, and your dreams are treated like crimes. A world where simply standing up straight is considered rebellion. This was the reality millions of Black Americans faced until a spark of courage began to burn inside hearts that refused to be silent. This story is not just history, it is a reminder of how ordinary people, armed with nothing but hope and faith, rose against a system built to break them. And once that fire started, nothing, not fear, not threats, not violence, could stop it. The boy stopped the moment his eyes caught the sign on the store window. The letters weren't big, but their meaning was huge, heavy, and sharp, whites only. He stared at it as if the world had suddenly changed shape around him. As if everything he believed about fairness had quietly slipped away without warning. His mother felt his hand loosen in hers, a tiny signal that something inside him had shaken. She hoped he wouldn't ask the question, the one every Black parent dreaded, the one that scraped old wounds open every time it was spoken. But children sense injustice even before they understand it. And he finally whispered, "Mama, why can't we go in there?" She froze for a heartbeat because there was no easy answer. How do you explain cruelty to someone whose heart hasn't even learned what hatred is? She looked at the sign, then at her son, and her chest tightened the way it always did. Fear and love tangled together, both fighting to protect him. She gave his hand a small squeeze, trying to guide him away, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed glued to that sign, like the words held him in place. He wasn't angry, he wasn't crying, he was just confused, and that confusion was the most painful thing of all. She crouched beside him slowly, the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. Her voice trembled as she said, "Baby, some people don't understand us yet, that's why." She wanted to say more, to wrap her arms around him and promise a future where signs like this didn't exist. But promises felt fragile in a world built on separation. The boy looked at the window again, seeing his own reflection overlapping the cruel words. For the first time, he saw that the world could divide people without even knowing their name, their heart, or their dreams. That realization settled in his chest like a cold stone. His mother placed her hand gently on the side of his face, turning him toward her. "You are just as good as anyone," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of pain and courage. "One day, they'll know that, and you'll walk anywhere you want." She didn't know if he believed her, but she needed him to hear the truth she carried inside her. As they walked away, he looked back one last time. The sign didn't change, but he did. Something inside him shifted, something small, quiet, but powerful. A seed planted in soil made of injustice and hope. Later that night, when the world was silent and he lay staring at the ceiling, the sign returned to his mind. He remembered the way it made him feel. Small, unwelcome, invisible, but he also remembered his mother's voice, trembling but strong. And in that mix of pain and comfort, a spark formed. An inner vow he couldn't fully understand yet, but one that would shape the path of millions who would rise for their rights. Here is *** key point 2 expanded into 10 emotional, curiosity, building, motivating paragraphs ***. No headings, no conclusions ***. Every great movement begins with a whisper before it becomes a storm. The struggle for justice in America started with quiet, trembling voices that had been silenced for centuries. These voices belonged to men, women, and children who were tired of being treated as shadows in their own land. Their pain was real, their fear was real, but something inside them refused to die, the belief that dignity belonged to them just as much as anyone else. As their voices grew louder, they transformed into a force no one could ignore. People who had never spoken up before suddenly found the courage to stand in the open and say, "Enough." They weren't soldiers, they weren't leaders, they were ordinary individuals, factory workers, maids, farmers, students, but their hearts burned like fire. That fire would eventually reshape an entire nation. Among them emerged individuals who refused to bow to injustice. Instead of responding with violence, they chose a path the world rarely expects from the oppressed: peaceful strength. They believed that truth, if spoken with discipline and unity, could cut deeper than any weapon. This belief made their movement different from anything America had ever witnessed. Crowds began to gather not for spectacle but for survival. Families walked hand in hand, knowing each march could be their last. They were met with threats, hate, and brutality, yet every time the world expected them to break, they stood stronger. Their resilience confused their enemies and inspired their allies. Behind every march, there were countless untold stories of mothers who feared for their sons, fathers who prayed for safety, and children who wondered why the world had marked them as lesser. These stories became the heartbeat of the movement, reminding everyone what they were fighting for: the simple right to exist with dignity. What began with a few voices soon became a tidal wave. People from different backgrounds joined them, realizing that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. Every step they took carried the weight of generations who had suffered in silence, and every chant they shouted echoed the dreams of those who never got to see freedom. Their message spread across the country, turning cities into battlegrounds, not of weapons, but of willpower. Streets that once symbolized division transformed into pathways of unity. Each demonstration made the movement harder to ignore and forced America to look directly at the truth it had buried. Students left classrooms, workers left factories, ministers left churches, all marching side by side. The world watched as a suppressed community rose without hatred, using courage as their shield. They proved that a voice guided by justice can be more powerful than any chain meant to silence it. Fear tried to break them many times, but purpose held them together. Whenever the movement faced darkness, someone stepped forward with hope, whether it was a leader at a podium, a mother on her doorstep, or a young boy holding a sign bigger than himself. Hope became their greatest weapon. By turning their pain into purpose, they sparked a revolution of hearts. Their movement became a reminder that change doesn't begin with the powerful, it begins with the brave. The question was no longer whether they deserved equality, but how long the world could survive without it. The movement found strength not just in crowds, but in the powerful presence of leaders whose words could calm storms and ignite hearts at the same time. These leaders carried the weight of a wounded community on their shoulders, yet they walked with a grace that made even their opponents pause. They didn't lead from anger, they led from a deep, unshakable belief that humanity could rise above its darkest instincts. Every time one of these leaders stepped onto a stage or stood before a crowd, silence would fall like an invisible curtain. People listened because these leaders spoke truths that had been buried for generations. Their voices didn't tremble. They rang out with a courage that made people feel seen, valued, and unbroken. It was as if their words stitched together the pain of millions and turned it into a single, powerful message. Their speeches became the heartbeat of the movement. They didn't just highlight injustice, they painted a vision of a future where dignity wasn't a dream, but a birthright. People weren't just marching anymore, they were marching towards something, a world where their children wouldn't have to fear the color of their skin. A world where opportunity didn't depend on which door you knocked on, but leadership came with danger. Every speech, every public appearance, every step in front of a crowd was a risk. Enemies lurked in the shadows, waiting for a chance to silence the voices calling for change. Yet the leaders never stepped back. Their courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to move forward despite it. These leaders knew that the wrong word could ignite chaos, and the right word could calm an entire nation. So they chose every phrase with the precision of someone shaping destiny. When they spoke of hope, hope spread. When they spoke of unity, unity grew. Their influence traveled far beyond those who could hear them directly, reaching hearts across cities, states, and even continents. Sometimes they would stand in front of crowds who had been bruised, beaten, and humiliated only hours earlier. Instead of fueling rage, they reminded them that dignity lies in rising above hatred. They told them that the world changes when people refuse to mirror the cruelty they face. This message, repeated again and again, made the movement unstoppable. These leaders didn't see themselves as heroes. They saw themselves as servants of a cause larger than any one lifetime. They were willing to sacrifice their own safety because they believed that freedom was worth any cost. Their lives became a symbol of what it means to love justice more than comfort. There were moments when exhaustion crushed them, moments when threats cornered them, moments when the weight of their responsibilities felt unbearable. Yet every time they considered resting, they remembered the faces of the people who depended on them. The elderly who had suffered too long, the children who deserved better, the youth who trusted them. These memories pushed them forward. In private, they questioned themselves, they prayed, and they fought internal battles the world never saw. But when they stepped back into the light, they carried themselves with the steadiness of a mountain. Their presence alone made people believe that change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Through their words, their patience, and their courage, these leaders transformed fear into power. They turned generations of silence into a roar that the world could not ignore. Their leadership became the compass that guided millions through darkness, giving hope to those who had forgotten what hope felt like. As the movement grew, the streets became their battlefield, not with weapons, but with courage. Every march was a test of endurance, a silent challenge to a system that had tried to suppress them for centuries. They walked knowing that every step forward defied the invisible chains that had held their community back. The sound of thousands of feet moving together felt like thunder rolling across a nation that had tried to pretend nothing was wrong. The danger was real. Police lines stood like walls of iron, blocking the path of people armed with nothing but determination. Officers held shields and batons, marchers held signs and prayers. The imbalance of power was terrifying, yet the marchers kept moving. They had learned that fear loses its power when righteous purpose becomes stronger than the instinct to run. Sometimes the crowd would freeze as officers shouted warnings. Tension would crackle through the air like electricity before a storm. Everyone knew that one wrong move, one spark, could turn the entire moment into chaos. But then, someone in the crowd would lift a hand, chanting words of peace, reminding everyone that their strength wasn't in violence, it was in unity. Despite the risk, people of all ages stepped forward. Grandmothers leaned on canes as they marched, refusing to let age silence them. Young children clutched the hands of their parents, witnessing history with wide, curious eyes. Teenagers marched with the raw, emotional fire of youth, determined to be the generation that put an end to injustice. The diversity within the crowd became its own statement. This was a movement for everyone. The opposition didn't only show itself in the streets. Threats came from the shadows, anonymous letters, whispered warnings, and violent plots aimed at breaking the spirit of the movement. Yet every attempt to intimidate only fueled their resolve. It proved that their voices had become powerful enough to scare those who wanted to maintain the old order. When clashes erupted, it wasn't because the marchers wanted a fight. It was because they were met with force meant to silence them. Images of peaceful protesters facing fire hoses, police dogs, and beatings spread across the country. Instead of scaring people into silence, these images awakened those who had never seen the brutality up close. The world was forced to confront a truth that could no longer be hidden. In those moments of chaos, leaders would step into the center of the storm, urging calm even as sirens wailed and people screamed. Their voices cut through the panic, reminding everyone that they were not fighting for revenge, they were fighting for dignity. Their presence often prevented disaster, turning potential riots into controlled, powerful demonstrations. Every march felt like a gamble. Some ended in songs and celebration. Others ended with people dragged away in handcuffs or carried away in ambulances. But no matter how each day ended, the movement didn't stop. The bruises faded, but the will to continue only grew stronger. Pain became a badge of honor, proof that they had stood their ground. Over time, the marches began to change the atmosphere of the nation. People watching from their windows started joining. Those who had stayed silent out of fear began to speak. Even those who once opposed the movement found themselves questioning their own beliefs as they witnessed the resilience and dignity of the protesters. And while the marches were physically exhausting, emotionally draining, and often terrifying, they created a force that the nation could no longer ignore. Every demonstration carved another crack into the wall of injustice. Step by step, chant by chant, they forced a conversation that the country had avoided for far too long. The media became both a window and a weapon, shaping how the world understood the struggle. Every time a camera clicked, it captured not just an image, but a battle between dignity and injustice. These images carried the truth far beyond the streets where it happened, landing in living rooms, newspapers, and television screens across the nation. People who once ignored the suffering were suddenly confronted by it in raw, undeniable detail. Photographs of peaceful marchers facing violent resistance created shockwaves. A single image of a child clinging to their mother, while police unleashed force, told a story more powerful than any speech. These pictures pierced through the silence that had protected discrimination for so long. They forced the country to look at a reality it had tried to bury under polite conversation and political excuses. Television news brought the movement into homes every night. Families sat around their sets, watching scenes of brutality that looked more like war zones than American streets. The nation could no longer pretend that injustice was a distant problem. It was right there, glowing on their screens, demanding to be acknowledged. Those who had never marched, never protested, never spoken up suddenly felt a shift in their hearts. Journalists began interviewing the victims, giving voice to people who had been silenced for generations. Their words shook viewers, the tremble in a witness's voice, the quiet strength in a survivor's eyes. These emotional details awakened empathy in people who had never cared before. The pain of the community became the pain of the entire country, but the media did more than show suffering. It revealed resilience. Cameras captured moments of unity that were breathtaking. Strangers protecting each other from danger, crowds singing together as if their voices could rewrite history, leaders stepping forward with courage that brightened even the darkest moments. These images reminded the world that the movement wasn't only about struggle, it was about hope. At the same time, not all media coverage was fair. Some tried to twist the narrative, painting the marchers as troublemakers or exaggerating small incidents to discredit the movement. This created another battlefield, one fought with words, headlines, and biased reporting. But even this resistance couldn't outweigh the overwhelming truth, captured by honest journalists and compassionate photographers. International media soon picked up the story. Newspapers overseas began publishing images of the movement, questioning how a nation that called itself a land of freedom could allow such injustice within its borders. The world watched the United States with critical eyes, pressuring the nation to confront its contradictions. This global attention added a new weight to the struggle. America was being held accountable on an international stage. Activists quickly realized the power of media and used it strategically. They organized marches in places where cameras would see them, ensuring that no one could claim ignorance. They held signs with powerful messages, knowing a single photo could become a symbol recognized across continents. The movement learned to speak not just through chants, but through visuals that echoed across time. Some of the most iconic images became permanent engravings on the nation's conscience. Photographs frozen in black and white told stories of pain, strength, and unbreakable will. These images lived long after the moments had passed, reminding future generations of the sacrifices made and the courage shown. Through the lens of the media, the movement grew from a local fight to a national awakening. It proved that truth, once revealed, becomes unstoppable. And in exposing the truth, the media didn't just record history, it helped shape it. turning silent suffering into a voice so powerful the entire world was forced to listen. The movement grew stronger when allies from outside the Black community stepped forward, adding their voices to the call for justice. Some were ordinary citizens, others were religious leaders, students, teachers, and even politicians who could no longer stay silent while injustice unfolded before their eyes. Their support showed the nation that this struggle was not the responsibility of one group. It was a test of humanity itself. Many of these allies had lived their whole lives without understanding the depth of the suffering happening around them. But when they saw the images of brutality, heard the cries for equality, and witnessed the courage of peaceful protesters, something inside them changed. Their silence felt like betrayal, so they chose to stand beside those fighting for their rights, even if it meant facing danger. Interracial marches began to appear on the streets, sending a powerful message that unity was stronger than hate. Seeing people of different colors walk side by side confused those who depended on division to maintain control. The image of a white student holding hands with a black marcher shook the foundations of segregation. It challenged generations of prejudice and showed that change could come from unexpected places. Some allies used their platforms to amplify the movement. Writers wrote articles that pierced through the lies, musicians created songs that became anthems of hope, and religious leaders delivered sermons that echoed through packed churches. Their words touched hearts that might have ignored the movement otherwise. Support from different communities helped the message travel farther, reaching people who had never experienced discrimination, but could no longer deny it existed. Allies also brought protection. There were moments when their presence prevented violence because authorities feared the backlash of attacking mixed groups. Many allies stood on the front lines, forming human shields around marchers, showing that defending justice required more than sympathy. It required courage. The sight of interracial solidarity became one of the most powerful symbols of the era. Of course, not everyone welcomed these allies. Some people accused them of betrayal, calling them traitors for supporting equality. Others threatened them with violence, hoping to scare them into retreat. But the true allies refused to back down. They understood that justice meant nothing if it only applied to some. They were willing to risk their relationships, reputations, and even their safety to stand on the right side of history. In some towns, allies opened their homes to activists who needed a safe place to rest or hide. These hidden acts of bravery rarely made headlines, but they saved lives. Allies also helped with organizing meetings, printing flyers, fundraising, and transporting activists when travel became dangerous. There behind the scenes support kept the movement running even when pressure was at its highest. Universities became centers of solidarity. Students held sit-ins, walkouts, and peaceful demonstrations to show that the next generation would not accept a future built on discrimination. Their youthful energy reinvigorated the movement, reminding everyone that change would not stop with the current leaders. It would continue through the hands of the young. Despite differences in background, culture, and upbringing, these allies shared one belief: that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Their involvement helped transform the movement from a community struggle into a national awakening. It forced society to understand that equality was not a request, it was a right. Through their unity, the movement became unstoppable. It proved that when people from different walks of life join together for a righteous cause, no wall of hatred can stand against them. Their courage showed the nation that true strength lies not in power or fear, but in standing with those who refuse to stop fighting for their humanity. The government could not ignore the growing pressure forever. The marches, the speeches, the court cases, and the images that flooded the media all began to weigh on national leaders. Every day, officials received letters, phone calls, and reports from across the country, exposing the painful divide that threatened to tear the nation apart. The demand for justice grew so loud that even those who once stayed distant were now forced to confront reality. Inside government buildings, debates became fierce. Some leaders argued that change was necessary to preserve the nation's moral integrity, while others resisted, clinging to outdated beliefs and the fear of losing control. The tension inside those rooms mirrored the tension in the streets, but one thing became clear: the government could no longer hide behind silence. Activists pushed relentlessly. They held meetings with officials, presented evidence of discrimination, and spoke with a fire that made even hardened politicians shift uncomfortably in their seats. Every conversation was a battlefield, yet activists sat there with calm determination, reminding those in power that their decisions affected millions who had waited far too long for equality. The pressure intensified when international voices began criticizing the United States. Countries around the world questioned how a nation that called itself a symbol of freedom could allow such injustice within its borders. The embarrassment was undeniable. Government leaders realized that the issue was no longer just domestic, it had become global. The world was watching, and the world was judging. Finally, the weight of public demand forced the government to take action. Bills were drafted, laws were debated, and discussions that had been delayed for decades suddenly became urgent. The movement had pushed the nation to a point where ignoring injustice was more dangerous than confronting it. The machinery of government, slow and resistant, began to move. When new laws were passed, they didn't magically erase discrimination, but they struck down the most blatant forms of it. Segregation in public places was declared illegal. Voting rights were protected. Schools were ordered to integrate. These changes were monumental, reshaping the structure of a society that had once accepted inequality as normal. But even with these victories, activists knew that laws alone could not change hearts. They understood that a signature on a document meant little if society refused to evolve. Still, they celebrated these legal wins because they represented something powerful: the first cracks in a system built on centuries of oppression. The government had acknowledged the problem, and that acknowledgement alone was historic. Some politicians tried to take credit, pretending they had supported change all along. But the community knew the truth. It wasn't the government that initiated transformation. It was the people who pushed, demanded, marched, and refused to sit down. The laws passed were the result of relentless pressure from ordinary individuals who refused to accept injustice. Even with new legislation, resistance remained. Some states dragged their feet, trying to ignore or delay the changes. Activists had to continue fighting, reminding leaders that equality was not negotiable. They understood that every battle won opened the door to another. The journey was far from over, but the direction had finally shifted. For the first time in generations, hope began to feel like reality. The government's response, though imperfect and slow, proved one thing: when people unite with courage, persistence, and unbreakable will, even the mightiest systems can be forced to bend. And in that moment, the movement realized that they were not just witnessing history, they were rewriting it. The movement's victories did not come without sacrifice. Every step forward was paid for in courage, fear, and sometimes blood. Families waited anxiously at windows, wondering if their loved ones would return from marches unharmed. Mothers cried silent prayers. Fathers tried to hide their worry, and children learned too early that fighting for justice could mean risking everything. Many activists lived with constant threats. Their phones rang at night with anonymous voices promising violence. Their mailboxes filled with warnings meant to break their spirit, yet instead of running, they stood taller. They understood that intimidation was the enemy's last weapon, used when the truth had already begun to win. Some leaders were arrested repeatedly, dragged away in front of crowds to send a message of fear. But each time they walked out of jail, they returned stronger, more determined than before. Their resilience became a symbol of the movement's heartbeat, a reminder that chains could restrain bodies but never principles. There were moments when the cost became unbearably real. Peaceful protesters were beaten in broad daylight, their screams echoing through streets that had long known silence. These scenes were horrifying, but they ignited something powerful. People who had never marched before began showing up, driven by the injustice they could no longer deny. Families of activists made sacrifices too. They endured sleepless nights, financial pressure, and separation when their loved ones traveled across states to lead demonstrations. Their quiet strength often went unnoticed, but without them, the movement's backbone would have been far weaker. They carried the emotional weight that few outside the struggle ever understood. Some individuals lost their jobs because they stood for equality. Employers fired workers simply for attending protests or speaking out. But even unemployment didn't stop them. They found new ways to contribute: volunteering, organizing, spreading awareness, and using their voice to inspire others. They proved that purpose was stronger than economic fear. In certain towns, activists were forced to leave their homes because hostility grew too dangerous. Their homes were burned, their property destroyed, their families targeted. Yet even as they fled for safety, they continued the fight from wherever they went. Their displacement became another chapter in the story of resilience. Tragically, some paid the ultimate price. Lives were lost, some taken by violence, others by exhaustion or the crushing weight of constant fear. These losses shook the movement to its core. Marchers stood together in funerals, holding candles that flickered like fragile hopes. Tears rolled down faces, but those tears hardened into determination. Every fallen hero became a reminder of how high the stakes truly were. The government, the media, and the entire nation watched as the sacrifices grew heavier. But instead of collapsing under the pressure, the movement transformed this pain into fuel. Every injury, every loss, every threat became a spark that lit another torch of courage in someone new. The sacrifices expanded the movement, not weakened it. In the end, the suffering forced the world to confront a truth it could no longer escape. Freedom is never won by comfort. It is shaped by sacrifice, held by courage, and kept alive by those who dare to push forward even when the cost feels unbearable. And through these sacrifices, the movement proved that no matter how dark the night becomes, the human spirit is capable of rising again and again, refusing to be broken. As the movement began to reshape the nation, something powerful happened within the hearts of millions. People who had once lived in fear started to feel a quiet strength rising inside them. They looked at the progress unfolding around them and realized they were no longer shadows in their own country. They were becoming part of the story that would be remembered for generations. Hope, once a fragile whisper, grew into a force that could not be denied. Children who grew up watching the marches and listening to the speeches began to imagine a different future. They looked at their parents and saw not victims, but fighters, leaders, and survivors. In classrooms, in playgrounds, in crowded neighborhoods, young minds started believing that their dreams were valid. The movement was no longer just a response to injustice. It was a promise of what the next generation could achieve. The victory of new laws and changing attitudes did not erase the scars, but it transformed them into symbols of strength. People carried their memories of struggle like badges, reminders of how far they had come. Instead of dragging them down, these memories pushed them forward. They knew that the journey ahead would still be hard, but they also knew that the impossible had already been achieved. Communities that had once been silenced began celebrating their identity instead of hiding it. Music, art, poetry, and culture flourished with new life. Festivals, sermons, and gatherings became places where hope was passed from one person to another, like a torch. It was as if an entire community discovered the beauty of its own voice, and that voice refused to fade. The movement also changed the hearts of people outside the Black community. Many who had been indifferent or unaware began to reflect on their own beliefs. Conversations that were once avoided now happened openly. Families discussed justice at dinner tables. Teachers introduced new lessons in classrooms. Churches preached messages of unity. The nation was slowly learning that silence had never been neutral. It had always been a choice. New leaders emerged, inspired by the courage of those who came before. Some were activists, some were writers, some were teachers, and some were everyday citizens who finally understood their own power. They carried the spirit of the movement into places it had never reached. Every new voice, added to a growing chorus that insisted the fight for justice would continue until equality became reality for all. The movement's victories also revealed how deeply connected people were. Across states, across cultures, and across neighborhoods, strangers supported each other as if they had known one another for years. The idea of unity became more than just a slogan. It became a lived experience. People realized that when they stood together, they were stronger than any system designed to divide them. Even in quiet moments late at night, when the streets were empty, there was a sense that something had changed forever. The fear that once controlled lives had lost its grip. Instead, people felt a calm determination, a quiet belief that progress was possible. It was a shift so deep that it could be felt even in the smallest interactions, like the way neighbors greeted each other or the confidence with which children walked to school. What truly defined this era was the realization that justice was not an event, but a continuous effort. The movement had taught people to stay alert, to keep speaking, to keep pushing. They understood that every generation would need to defend what had been won. But instead of feeling discouraged by this truth, they embraced it. They had already proven that change was possible. Now they wanted to protect it. And as the nation slowly transformed, the legacy of their struggle began to shine. People looked back at the marches, the sacrifices, the triumphs, and understood that they had lived through a moment that would echo through centuries. The movement had given the world a message that could never be forgotten, that hope, once awakened, can outshine even the darkest injustice, and that the human spirit becomes unstoppable when it refuses to give up. If their courage could shatter centuries of oppression, imagine what your courage could do today. People who marched, suffered, and sacrificed didn't just fight for themselves. They fought so others could rise higher than they ever did. Their story is a mirror held up to all of us, asking one question: what will you do with the freedom they bled for? If this journey moved your heart, then join us, stay connected, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered, honored, and shared with the world.